My name is Bruno Sade from brunosade.com. Today I want to talk about the usefulness of tapping while crying as a way to enhance emotional release. You may have noticed that sometimes when we try to tap by ourselves, it can be difficult to know what words to use or how to identify a specific event, what emotion we are feeling about it, where in our bodies, etc. So that's why some people have suggested to use continuous tapping throughout our day as a very simple way to bring more tapping into our daily routine. The idea is that whenever we have the chance, we simply tap through the points without using any words. So, for example, we might be watching TV or sitting down on the couch, and we simply start tapping without focusing on anything in particular. And so because we don't have to do any active mental effort in terms of what to focus on, what words to use as we are tapping, it's very simple to use. All we have to do is remember the points. Now, I have tried this approach in the past, and honestly, in my experience, it hasn't worked very well for me. Mostly, it just left my arms feeling tired, but I didn't notice much difference emotionally, despite how much tapping I was doing. But what has worked well for me, and continues to do so, is to add this continuous tapping through the points without using any words whenever I happen to find myself crying, which isn't all that frequent, honestly, but sometimes I might be feeling sad about something. Maybe it's about a certain feeling of nostalgia, or simply thinking about how we are all getting older, or how the world is so unfair in many ways. There's so much suffering. So sometimes that kind of reality brings me down, makes me feel sad. And if I just happen to notice I feel like crying or I start crying, I'm usually by myself when this happens, just tapping through the points while I simply allow myself to think what I think and feel what I feel tends to bring very quick emotional relief. Usually what I notice is that after a few minutes of doing this, suddenly I don't feel so sad anymore. I tend to feel a lot lighter. And also afterwards, when I go back to thinking about whatever it was that was making me feel upset, it doesn't seem to have the same emotional charge as it did before. So you might have noticed that many people find it cathartic to cry every now and then. They don't necessarily choose to do so, but maybe it just happens that perhaps this happens to you as well, that every now and then you simply cry and it's kind of cathartic. Perhaps it also feels draining, emotionally draining or exhausting to some degree. And what can also happen is that when people do this afterwards, maybe the next day or the next week or whenever, when they go back to thinking about whatever issue was making them feel so sad or so upset, there's still almost the same emotional charge as before. So the sense of emotional release or relief was kind of temporary in a way. So I think that if we simply add tapping to the routine of crying whenever we spontaneously cry, that sense of release or relief tends to be deeper and more profound in a way. So what do I mean by adding tapping to the crying routine? What I simply mean is that you cry as usual. So you allow yourself to think what you think, allow yourself to feel what you feel, but you simply add the physical act of tapping through the points as you are doing that. So you don't have the agenda of trying to make the sadness, the grief, the sorrow, the whatever emotion you are feeling go away as quickly as possible. You are simply allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling, and you are simply tapping through the points without any specific agenda. And at least in my experience, after a few minutes of doing this, maybe I notice that suddenly I don't feel so sad anymore. Maybe I have a different, more empowering perspective on the issue I was focusing on. So actually, if you were to ask me what personal experience or evidence do you have that tapping works, that tapping has some kind of effect on our emotions, I would say that tapping while crying is one of the ways where I have noticed the most effect in terms of, wow, like just a few moments ago, I was feeling really sad. And now suddenly I feel a lot emotionally lighter. So that's been my experience. I'm not saying necessarily to force yourself to cry, but if you notice that you just so happen to be crying, simply see if you can remember to add the tapping while you are doing that and see what happens. And if you do so, I would love to hear or read what your experience has been with this, if you find it equally helpful. And of course, like I usually say, if when you are tapping by yourself, you stumble upon a memory or something that maybe feels too emotionally intense or too traumatic to work on by yourself, then in that case, I recommend to enlist the aid of a certified EFT practitioner, perhaps someone who has a mental health background, such as myself or someone else. But otherwise, feel free to give this a try and see what happens. That's it for today. I hope this was useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in one of my next videos.